This is FLOSS Weekly. I'm Doc Searls, and this week I'm joined by Katherine Druckman and Dan Lynch and Simon Phipps and Leo Laporte himself to celebrate the victory of FLOSS, Free, Libre, Open Source. We succeeded. We succeeded as a community, we succeeded as a cause, and we succeeded as a show. And this, in fact, is our final show. It's the last FLOSS Weekly. So tune into that. It's a good one, and it's a great way to go out, and that's coming up next.
Podcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is TWiT.
This is FLOSS Weekly, episode 761, recorded Wednesday, December 13th, 2023. We won. This episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Bitwarden, the open source password manager to help you stay safe online. Get started with a free Teams or Enterprise Plan trial, or get started for free across all devices as an individual user at bitwarden.com/twit. And by Collide. That's Collide with a K. Collide is a device trust solution for companies with Okta, and they ensure that if a device isn't trusted and secure, it can't log into your cloud apps. Visit collide.com/floss to book an on-demand demo today. Hello again, everyone, everywhere. This is FLOSS Weekly. I am Doc Searls, and this week we're having a roundtable, and I see there are 5 people around the roundtable, including 2 of me on my screen here, from the UK, well in advance of the US. Both Simon Phipps and Dan Lynch, representing FC. What football club are you for? Do you care? I know Dan is for Liverpool. Simon doesn't care. Is there one in Southampton? There must be a football club.
There is.
A relegated one, maybe, or I don't know.
Allegedly. All I know is it disrupts the traffic, like the cruise liners do.
Yeah. And from Houston, Texas, Katherine Druckman.
I'm going to start talking like that. Yes, that's me. Maybe I do talk like that. I don't even know, huh?
No, you don't.
Okay, we'll find out.
No, you don't.
That's the rest of us that have accents.
And we're here to celebrate, not at the end of the year, but toward the end of the year, the victory, if you could call it that, of FLOSS, the Free, Libre, Open Source, which we've been fighting for on this show for, I don't know how many years, maybe somebody in the back channel.
I saw 17 somewhere.
It's 750 some episodes, so a lot of them, and we won, and this is debatable. We already had a bit of a debate before the show. I maybe just finger one of you. So, Katherine, your job is talking open source at Intel. So you won Intel over. I mean, yes,
it was all me. Intel was won over many, many years ago before I got there. But yeah, so that part of winning is that it's ubiquitous, and open source software is very important to any big technology company. Certainly, critical software is made with open source components at minimum, and more likely it is completely open source. Look at something like Kubernetes, right? One of the biggest success stories since Linux, I would say, or Apache. It's everywhere, but I think that changes the conversation, which is kind of what I'm interested for us to get into. What does that victory mean, right? What does the ubiquity of open source mean? And a lot of times those conversations come up in security conversations, in regulation conversations, and I think that's going to be an interesting. I'm anxious to hear from Simon and Dan and you on all of these things. So
I want to hear from Simon first, because just in advance of the show, he shared some numbers that I thought were astonishing. So many billions of dollars, euros, pounds. Yeah. What is that? What is the story?
Well, it depends on which source you look at, but it's generally understood that the software, and I can talk about Europe because my job at the moment is talking about public policy in relation to technology in Europe. And so I can tell you that the European IT industry, 10% of its turnover is generated by open source software. And between 85 and 99% of all the software on the market in Europe, we estimate about 95%, is made at least half with open source. And another estimate suggests that the average open source content in any commercial product exceeds 90%. So what people are doing is they're building on open source to come to market. It's allowing them to come to market faster. It's allowing them to have a more secure base. And the result of that is that open source is now generating over €1 billion of GDP for the European Union. And the inevitable consequence of that is, where open source is now 25 this year. Free software as a concept is 40 years old this year. And as a consequence of those two great big numbers, the regulators have showed up. And so this year I've been dealing with over 9 separate legislative packages in the European Commission. And there's a load more. And the same thing is happening in Washington, D.C. And the same thing is happening in Japan and China and India. The regulators are coming. And the people who are briefing them say that we are the enemy. And so we've come from the place where we were the plucky underdog fighting Microsoft to the place where we are the dominant party partnering with Microsoft. And I think that's the big change to talk about.
So when these people are characterizing open source as the enemy, or we as individuals or as a collective, I suppose, as the enemy, in what sense? Insecure, as Katherine mentioned earlier? No, what?
So people, we gave names to our failures. We call them things like Heartbleed. The proprietary failures typically don't have names because they're all done in secret. And so nobody knows how deep the hole is and how bad the poison is. But all of our failures are very public. And so the folk they're typically from big telecoms companies who are busy undermining open source. They're saying how insecure it is and how unprofessional it is, and what a risk it introduces into the organization, and how it allows people from foreign countries to work on the code in your company. And they say those sorts of things. That's on their briefing list. And that may sound like old stuff from years ago, but people are still saying that today in briefings.
But if you're in a country,
you would say, sorry, go ahead.
What's that, Dan?
No, sorry. I was just going to say, if you're in a country other than the US and you're buying your software from an American company, you're allowing foreigners to work on your software anyway, and you can't see what they're doing. So, for me, I thought that argument was won a long time ago, but it seems like it keeps coming back up. It just won't. No,
this is the great thing with when you're dealing with people who are making populist arguments is they tend to accuse you with the things they're guilty of themselves.
Right. Right.
There are certain politicians that I'm not allowed to talk about who tend to do that as well. So, you see it happening routinely in the lobbying that's going on, certainly in Europe, and I'm sure in Washington, D.C. as well. You get all the proprietary companies saying how the insecurity and obscurity of the supply chain is a threat to your security, when it's actually their supply chain that is okay.
Absolutely.
And it's their software which is insecure. You hear them talking about how it's foreign nationals being involved in your IT, when actually, if you're here in Europe, it's all of those foreign nationals who are unaccountable to your government who are involved in the IT. So I think it's just another one of those populist argument things, as they point the finger, they've got 3 fingers pointing back at themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Years ago, I saw on the SolarWinds site, speaking of high profile security issues, but on the SolarWinds site, and I don't know if this content came from SolarWinds or it was just user generated, but I saw a post describing using open source software as eating off of a dirty fork. There's this sort of and then I thought, well, that didn't age well. So an example, if you will, of the type of thing that Simon's talking about. I would say, Doc, you like to describe muggles versus wizards, right? Less technical people versus more technical people. And I think in this case, it's maybe the muggles discovered things like, what do you mean? Just anybody can contribute to this software and make a pull request, assuming they know what a pull request is. And I think that concept is very hard to grasp for people who do not work in software.
Yeah, and toward what Simon was saying about the campaign against open source, the same thing is being done here in the U.S. toward fiber, especially open fiber and community fiber and city-led fiber by the telcos. The telcos don't want to compete with, and the cable companies don't want to compete with fiber. The telcos are picking it up a bit now, but the story's the same. You don't know what's going on, and you need big companies, doing all their own work. There's an interesting backstory here, and I'm wondering, Katherine, if it works, if it applies to Intel. 1,000 years ago, in 1999, I think, back in the last millennium, anyway, I was witness to what happened at IBM, which is that IBM was sort of like just talking about, we're going to use some open source software to do WebSphere or something like that. And then the next year at Linux World, they had beanbags everywhere and Ethernet laying on the floor. Wi-Fi wasn't mature yet, and they had like a big team of people there now wearing sneakers and no longer wearing the black shoes, like all about open source. They're talking about it, but in truth, what happened, what I gathered, was that they had not every, but many of the old Windows boxes were now running Samba everywhere, and what they found was that they had to get in compliance with their own engineers. A giant engineering company has to do that. And I think the same thing happened to some degree with Microsoft. I haven't heard a precise story about that. The only thing I heard on that was, well, Bing, the search engine, was running entirely on Linux. And I think it was actually running on Akamai to begin with. They were hiring cloud to do it. I don't know what the story is now, but they got very much behind open source, at least in some ways. But I don't know. Was that the case with Intel? Intel's always been pretty friendly, at least the time I was.
Yeah. Or to my knowledge, again, all of this is, the adoption of open source and being and community involvement in Intel was way, way before my time. But I think Intel realized, to my knowledge, because this is a long time ago, realized the benefit of contributing to these projects. So many projects. I mean, I can't even. There are the number of projects that a company like Intel contributes to, and I'm sure Microsoft and Google, any big tech company, it's kind of mind-boggling, actually. They realized the benefit early on, and that has been the case ever since. But again, hardware company is quite different from a software company, so it's a little bit of a different conversation.
But I mean, speaking of Intel, I've always found, and I don't know if Simon will explode at this, but I've always found Intel to be quite friendly when it comes to things like drivers and so on for their hardware.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But it behooves Intel to be friendly. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, Intel was always one of the good guys. It's other companies that are more of a challenge. Again, I'm going to avoid naming too many names.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah. I have to say that's one of the reasons I joined Intel, because it's a good feeling to know that you're going to a place that values what you value. So.
Yeah. I mean, Intel was a big supporter of Open Solaris when we were doing that at Sun. They were willing to invest in things that were not the obvious winners in order to make sure that there was diversity in the market and that Intel was well represented everywhere. And I think they're something of an exemplar as an open source backer. I think that changes. Things come and go, and the staff has been changing quite a lot at Intel over the last year, and the way that it works has been changing quite a lot. So that, there are never permanently any good guys, which is as we're discovering. But nonetheless, I think Intel's been a pretty good player there. And again, at Sun, we try very much to aim to have that open approach as well. So I work very hard to get our silicon chips open source by publishing the Verilog. I don't think Intel's gone that far yet. Whereas we found that there were some other suppliers of chips to our company who stood in our way solidly when we tried to open source drivers to Solaris. They refused to allow us to publish the specs of the chips that we were using in our hardware, and they meant that it was impossible for us to get full peer Linux support, which we tried very hard to do in the mid 2000s. So Intel, I've got a lot of time for both its approach and its products, and I just wish that some of their competitors had the same willingness to take risks with their. Intel's willing to take the gamble that adoption was going to be a better benefit than secrecy. whereas companies like NVIDIA and Qualcomm don't have any of those instincts.
Mm-hmm.
I want to go, but go ahead.
No, I was just going to say to your point, Doc, about Microsoft and them supposedly, and Simon's point as well about Microsoft becoming, we're now kind of in bed with them. You've only got to look at GitHub. They own GitHub now, which is where a lot of open source projects, free software projects, maybe not free software projects, but certainly a lot of open source projects are based. But GitHub itself is proprietary. The software that runs GitHub is proprietary. So it's an interesting one because we're kind of building a castle again on sand in some ways. And
did it start out that way? Git itself?
I don't know.
Linus.
Git is free software, but GitHub has things in it that Git does not. So pull requests, the concept of a pull request comes from GitHub. It doesn't come from Git. And that's something that GitHub added. And I don't know if it's free software, to be honest, but I don't think that, certainly the web platform, the hosting platform, I don't think you can't get the code and run it yourself. It's not like you can self-host your own GitHub branded, repository.
Well, this is where it's so important to focus on the self-sovereignty of the end user. There's a bunch of companies out there that are using open source software to gain market share. But when it comes to sharing the freedoms of free software and the openness of open source software with their end users, they decide that that's not what they want to do. So we've seen this year a sequence of companies decide that they're going to introduce non-compete licensing to their source code, gradually take the journey towards being proprietary like CRM did. And I think we need to make sure that we encourage people to associate open source with end user self-sovereignty and not with any other concept like time to market or developer access or any other thing which serves the vendor rather than the end user.
That's good. I want to go deeper into self-sovereignty and in licensing as well in the role of OSI. And I want to get to that after I let everybody know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Bitwarden, the only open source cross-platform password manager you can trust. Security Now's Steve Gibson has even switched over. With Bitwarden, all of the data in your vault is end-to-end encrypted, and not just your passwords. Bitwarden protects you by creating unique usernames and adding strong, randomly generated passwords for each account, or using any of their 6 integrated email alias services. You can log into Bitwarden and decrypt your vault after using SSO on a registered trusted device. No master password is needed. On top of being public to the world, Bitwarden has professional third-party audits performed yearly and published on its website. You can even view all of Bitwarden's code on GitHub. Share private data securely with fully customizable plans for personal or business needs. Start with a personal plan that is free forever and get unlimited devices, unlimited passwords, and passkey management, or enjoy premium features by upgrading to a premium account for less than $1 a month. For only $3.33 a month, their family plan will give you up to 6 accounts with premium features and unlimited sharing and collections. Their enterprise plan is just $6 per user per month, and they now have a Teams starter plan, which is a flat $20 a month for 10 users, which provides great value for smaller teams with all the premium features, or pay $4 per month per user with teams of 11 or more. At TWiT, we're fans of password managers. Get started with Bitwarden's free trial of a Teams or enterprise plan, or get started for free across all devices as an individual user at bitwarden.com/twit. That's bitwarden.com/twit. So Simon, you've been with OSI for a very long time. And I want to go back to when, you just said earlier that we're at the 25th anniversary of open source.
Yeah.
From 1998. 1998 was when the letter went out from Eric Raymond saying, goodbye, something like goodbye free software, hello open source, or something like that. But a lot of geeks got together. I was not in that meeting, but I was close to it, reported on it, and was part of the team basically that promulgated open source successfully. I I ask people if they know what open source is at random, and they often know the word, don't know what it means, but they know the words and use it. So that's a big success. We won with that. But almost immediately, with OSI especially, the conversation is centered around licenses. And we've proliferated licenses over the years. The free software came with 2 licenses, I think, GPL and AGPL early on. So is that right? You're tilting your head. You fill me in on truth.
It was LGPL
on truth, because I'm winging it.
It was GPL and LGPL.
I'm sorry, AGPL came along later.
And they added
the
in
Alfaro GPL. I'm sorry.
And then they also added a license for documentation as well, GNU free documentation license.
Right.
So I mean, licensing is very important, because it's the licensing that concretely gives you the freedom to do what you want with the software without asking for further permission from the rights holders. Without the license, nothing would work. So this was one of my early criticisms of GitHub, is that GitHub didn't ask people who put code on GitHub to make sure it was licensed in a way that people other than GitHub could use it. In the early days of GitHub, almost all the software was unlicensed. And so that meant it was under copyright control. And that meant that nobody could legally use any of the software on GitHub. Although it's a tricky thing, because it's legal and there's expertise associated with it, the license is profoundly important, because it's what allows you to be self-sovereign in the software. So I don't think anyone should ever allow that to be deprecated or to go unsaid, that if you're using software and it doesn't have an OSI approved license, then you can't guarantee you've got the freedoms that you need to use the software. And that's the reason why the path that all of these database vendors mainly have been taking over the last couple of years is so bad, is because you can't be sure when you use MongoDB or Redis and all the others, that you've actually got the freedom to do the thing that you intend to do with the software, and that you will have that freedom in perpetuity throughout the life of your project, because they've decided to step back from guaranteeing end user self-sovereignty. So licensing sounds geeky, it sounds legalistic, but it's absolutely the anchor of what's going on. That isn't to say that the freedoms aren't important, because the whole reason we did this was to give end users the confidence that they are self-sovereign in their digital universe. And I've been trying to work out how to say that without saying either open source or free software for quite a long time. Because, open source is free software. Free software is open source. Making a distinction between the two is divisive. And so the best solution I've found is to not use either term and to talk about end user digital sovereignty. That's the key phrase that I've been using recently. And that's the reason we all came into it. So if the objective of putting it under the license isn't to deliver end user digital sovereignty, then it's probably not really open source, no matter what else is going on. And I think that's the emergent truth that's coming out of the increasing collaboration between the world of free software and the rest of the open universe. That actually what really matters is end user self-sovereignty, and that's the thing to fight for. That's the thing to tell the legislators that we need, not some other piece of construct which sounds and smells like it's ever so worthy and open, but doesn't actually deliver end user self-sovereignty.
So Dan and or Katherine, are you talking self-sovereignty when you talk about open source? Are you thinking in those terms?
It depends on the context. So if we're having an ideological conversation, then absolutely, like the type of conversation you and I tend to have elsewhere and here, yeah. But yeah, then yes, absolutely. But if I'm talking about software, well, this is difficult because software does not exist in a silo. But I don't know. Again, it depends on the context. I like to think so when I'm talking about the ideology of it all. But I'm not always talking about the ideology of it all.
How about you, Dan?
That was a great answer, by the way. I'd kind of like to just say +1 to what Katherine said, but that would be really be really lazy. No, I really like that term, self-sovereignty. It's not sovereignty, if I could say it properly. It's not a term that I would do. It's not a phrase that I've used often, but I'm going to steal that and use it because that is very good. I think Simon's very right in the fact that I have a lot, and I know Simon does too. I have a lot of friends in the free software camp and the open source camp, and I don't think there should be any of those camps. I think we're all on the same side. This is what Simon was saying. It's the same thing. We're all fighting for the same things. So I think, that historic kind of battle between the two, if we could abstract from that, which is what Simon was saying, that would be good, I think, for everyone. And I think self-sovereignty, when I talk to people about the idea of open source or free software, I always say to them, you would like to be able to look at the code, the freedoms that Simon talked about, the things that are in all of these OSI licenses and free software licenses, to be able to study the code, to run the code for your own purpose, to modify the code, to redistribute the code. I kind of explain those things to them, and usually they pick it up pretty quickly, and they can see why it's useful. I suppose it depends who you're arguing with. That's what Katherine said about context. I say arguing, who you're talking to about it. If you're talking to a salesperson from certain companies who sells proprietary software, then they're not going to necessarily agree with you on what you've got to say. But I find most people are quite open-minded. And one of the big things that I always say I've done some talks to university students who want to be developers, and I always say to them, they come to me and they'll say, I want to be a really famous developer. I want to be like, this, that, and the other. And I say to them, great. So what are you going to do? And they're like, I'm going to get a job for Apple, or I'm going to get a job for whoever. And I'm like, so who makes macOS? And they're like, what do you mean? So I said, tell me some names of some developers. And they can't. Yeah. They'll go, well, so I say to them, who makes Linux? And they'll go, Linus Torvalds and so-and-so and so-and-so. And I'll go, well, there you go. If you want to be a famous rock star, in quotes, coder, you need to be working in a space where your work can be seen and reviewed and shared and modified and all that kind of stuff. So
it's interesting to me that that self-sovereignty has, to me, it came out of, as a word in common usage, came out of the self-sovereign identity developer community, and there was a source there, and that source was a guy who's been on this show, and I don't know if he's been on our show, Katherine. Devin Lafredo. He's a teacher and hacker.
Yes,
in Long Island.
Talked to him on. Yep.
Yeah, and he did it around self-sovereign identity, and it's interesting because self-sovereignty assumes agency on the person's side. You're not just saying I'm independent. It's not about being isolated. It's about being capable, and that's what we want people to be. We want them to be capable, and that's kind of what we fought for the last X years. A question I have for Simon, but any of you can answer this: is licensing the reason why Linux succeeded in ways BSD did not? Because BSD did not have a free software license. They had the BSD license, which is really just a very permissive one.
I believe it is. I believe that it is the reason why it's become the most common general purpose operating system. But BSD is absolutely everywhere. And
it's in Apple computers. So yeah,
it's in all my light switches as well. It's everywhere. So, but I do think that the strength of the Linux licensing is that it guaranteed there could be no king by keeping the copyright distributed, and by having a license that meant that you couldn't behave as if you were the copyright owner, even though you had the freedom to do whatever you wanted with it. And so I think that using copyleft licensing was the key to success for Linux. And I think that the BSD, by focusing on giving everyone the freedom to behave as if they were king, resulted in the medieval world of many small principalities. And
FreeBSD, NetBSD, and yeah.
I do think it was the licensing that was the critical point in Linux becoming so big as a community thing. But we at our peril ignore the fact that BSD and that massive array of little principalities is actually a very strong force. It is absolutely everywhere. And just because it isn't on the cover of magazines and isn't being talked about on podcasts, that doesn't mean that it isn't the dominant operating system behind the scenes.
What were you about to say there, Dan? You're
kind of, to be honest, Simon's pretty much covered it. I was going to say it depends how you define success, because I'm very much a Linux guy. I love Linux. I don't really run BSD on anything other than maybe my light switch. Apparently, I didn't know that. So maybe I should look into that. But I was going to say success could be seen as being absorbed by Apple and the Darwin project and all of that. Depends. I don't see that as success because the code is not being contributed back by Apple in the same way because they don't have to. And they can build a proprietary thing on top of it. Because of the way it's licensed. So I don't know, but I'm sure people, to play devil's advocate a bit, and that's a joke because we got the devil in BSD. It's not a very good joke. The demon, of course. And maybe that is success for them. Maybe because the argument was always adoption, wasn't it, with permissive licenses? But it's not something that that I would see as success. But it depends. I mean, you mentioned it. If you've got a Mac, then you're running under the covers. You may not know it's there, but you're running a version of BSD.
Jonathan, who couldn't be here but it is still contributing, says it depends on the switch. If it's an ESP32 based device, it's not quite Linux or BSD. So,
wow,
it's still open sources everywhere. I'm just curious if anybody knows this. I mean, I think Darwin was the name for Apple's original version of the BSD kernel they used, the free BSD kernel. And I haven't heard that term in a long time.
The Darwin project is still going, yeah.
It's still going,
I believe. Yeah,
we for a few moments around whenever it was that Apple came out with that, we at Linux Journal were in conversation with people at Apple about doing a magazine for that, but there really wasn't. There was not an open source heart beating there. They're a lockdown company, so there that is. So, Katherine, you mentioned earlier about Kubernetes. You were at KubeCon recently. What is the scale of Kubernetes at this point? There's a secondary point I want to get to with it, but it is. When people are doing open source inside big companies, Kubernetes is kind of like the middle of it. Is that the case right now?
Well, I mean, it's massive. First of all, yes, the scale is massive. It's a massive project with a massive community, massive corporate support. It is also kind of becoming ubiquitous because there are a lot. It has a lot of use cases, right? And the kind of the glue that helps software get made and deployed and pushed into production and all of that is a lot of that heavily depends on stuff like Kubernetes and cloud native, other cloud native software. So yeah, I mean, from that perspective, yeah, I mean, if you are a sizable tech company, you're probably participating and contributing to Kubernetes and you're probably using it and benefiting from it. Is what I would say.
And Kubernetes is, you mentioned the cloud native community. Is Kubernetes only cloud native, or can it live outside the cloud? I don't even know. I hate to say how muggly I am about that.
Well, I mean, you could run Kubernetes locally. It takes a lot of resources. It exists to run things in the cloud, though. I mean, you would not. I mean, I suppose maybe somebody could think of some reason to use it outside of cloud, but that's what it's for, certainly.
Well, there's a hacky side to this, which is, and somebody in one of the earlier shows talked about this, that the more people are working on Kubernetes, there's several layers above the iron and the core software. The open source community is not as involved at that lower level. We don't have the hacky thing going on. And I want to get to that. But first, I have to let everybody know that this episode of FLOSS Weekly is brought to you by Collide. Collide is a device trust solution for companies with Okta, and they ensure that if a device isn't trusted and secure, it can't log into your cloud apps. If you work in security or IT and your company has Okta, this message is for you. Have you noticed that for the past few years, the majority of data breaches and hacks you read about have something in common? It's employees. Sometimes an employee's device gets hacked because of unpatched software. Sometimes an employee leaves sensitive data in an unsecured place. And it seems like every day a hacker breaks in using credentials they fished from an employee. The problem here isn't your end users, it's the solutions that are supposed to prevent these breaches. But it doesn't have to be that way. Imagine a world where only secure devices can access your cloud apps. In this world, phished credentials are useless to hackers, and you can manage every OS, including Linux, all from a single dashboard. Best of all, you can get employees to fix their own device security issues without creating more work for your IT team. The good news is you don't have to imagine this world. You can start using Collide. Visit collide.com/floss to book an on-demand demo today and see how it works for yourself. That's KOLIDE.com/floss. So I was saying before the break that not a theme, but a topic often brought up is how now that Linux especially, but open source has succeeded to the degree that it has, it's kind of less in command of, or even bringing in the kind of hackers that at least three people around this table are. And I'm wondering if, is that a false perception? Do we have fewer and fewer of those, or are there, or is there just so many more? It's kind of like what's happened with podcasting, actually. There are just so many more to choose from, right? They used to be, there were like 15 podcasts, and now there are millions of them. Now there are millions of open source developers, and the hardcore wizards that roll their own and all that are relatively a smaller population, but maybe enlarging anyway. I don't really have a sense of it. What do you guys think? Any one of you can jump in.
Well, I just think with ubiquity comes, let's say, a wider net, I guess. Lots of different types of people are working with and contributing to open source projects, but not everybody. This is a conversation. Gosh, I mean, I think we've had many, many times over the years, especially since Linux kernel's effective folding. But as the ubiquity has happened, you have so many people for whom open source, it's just part of the job, right? It's a tool. It's part of what they do, but they don't have to be. You don't have to be an open source enthusiast to be involved in open source. Is where I guess I'm going with that. So it's in many ways that's made it a more inclusive space, I think, because again, you're bringing in people with lots of different experience levels and lots of different perspectives to work on, potentially work on open source software, or at least use open source software. So it's become a different conversation. It is not a small group of, as you would call them, wizards anymore.
Also, there's different types of people using it as well. We don't just need coders. We also need people to do documentation. That's so important. Yeah. We need people to do translation, marketing, legal stuff. Simon's talked about the importance of licensing. We need legal people who understand these licenses to help us. We need all that stuff.
I think anyone who thinks that there is any lack of people doing open source should come to FOSDEM, which is the first February 3rd to 4th in Brussels. Which is as a conference at the university in Brussels. There will be 8,000 people there, all showing up to participate in mini conferences for hundreds of little projects and big projects as well. When you go to FOSDEM, you realize that there is a huge crowd of people quietly getting on with open source. And it may be that people are now confident enough in their community to not need to make themselves visible outside their community, to not need to consequently continually be involved in advocacy, because when you've won, you don't need advocates, and consequently, people just get on with the code because they know it's going to get used, because they have, take LibreOffice. LibreOffice has got something like 50 million users. There's a limit to just how much advocacy is truly necessary when you have that much. So I think what we've seen is the landscape shift and redesign itself because of the victory of end user self-sovereignty. That has delivered ubiquity, which in turn has delivered a different way of relating to the software, which in turn has led to people wanting to regulate our world, which has led to many other changes. And, you know, when we were talking before the show, Doc, I did wonder whether it was good to have won. I wonder whether maybe being the plucky underdog was more enjoyable than being the faceless advocate of the status quo. Dan, do you feel like a faceless advocate of the status quo now?
Looking faceful to me.
Yeah, maybe I always was to some degree, but I've always been more on the championing side of things because I do write code to some degree, but I don't contribute to anything major. So I've always felt a bit like an imposter in that I'm kind of championing this, but I'm not writing the actual code. So I don't know. Maybe.
That's a problem I think a lot of us have. I felt the same way. I mean, I worked for Linux Journal for how many years and never really felt like I was contributing until I actually started heavily contributing code to a big open source project. And I think that's my own personal baggage, but I don't think it's just me. I think a lot of people feel that way, and it's not correct, right? There are so many ways to contribute. And I would also add to what Simon said about advocacy. I don't think it's so much that advocates are no longer necessary, but the type of advocacy has changed. Consider again, at the beginning, we mentioned how critical a lot of, open source software is critical. If open source software went away, we would be in some post-apocalyptic movie, right? I mean, it depends. Everything we use day to day is relying on open source software, and all of these things have to be sustainable. And in order for them to be sustainable, you need to train a new generation of maintainers and contributors. And so advocacy maybe shifts from being like selling the idea of open source software, but instead to communicating community best practices, how to train new contributors and all that kind of thing. So I think the nature of advocacy has definitely shifted.
That is interesting. I'm thinking about journalism, and it's all about stories. And if you work at a newspaper, at least when they existed, the managing editor or the assignment editor would say, "What's the story?" That was you'd heard more than anything else. And stories are always about characters with a problem. And we had that, as Simon was saying, that with the open source community when it was small, and we were up against no less than Microsoft. And that was at a time when Microsoft was the dominant company. I mean, the feds in the US are trying to break them up. They were a devout enemy. Bill Gates hated open source, so did, and said so. And so did Steve Ballmer, went on about it. It was a big enemy, don't trust it and all that. And now, I mean, I used to have a business partner who was very hard to win an argument with, because after you won the argument, he was on your side. Just like you didn't have that satisfaction of him glowering or something. It was like, yeah, you're right. Okay. And then suddenly he was on your side. It's a little bit of that happened with Microsoft, I think. And so we don't have the same feeling of victory about it. It's just like, it just happened. Well, I want to go into a little bit more of the whole background here by bringing in somebody who was there at the beginning, and we'll get to that after this break. Okay, we're back, and I want to introduce somebody who, as they say, needs no introduction, because he started this thing a long time ago. How many years was it, Leo? 17 years.
Hey, everybody. Yeah, I started it and I killed it, so I guess I get both ends.
Yeah, but nobody knows that yet. So why don't you explain?
All right. So, nobody knows that yet. I won't say a word. FLOSS Weekly #1, which I did with Chris DeBona, who at the time was the in charge of open source at Google, was April 7th, 2006. And wow. one thing I'm super proud of, by the way, okay, I've been listening for a while. Just want to say, we also serve who simply use. The users are what it's all about. So I don't think, Katherine, you should ever feel guilty for not writing code or contributing documentation, because if everybody is a contributor, nobody's a user. We all have to. I guess we're all both. But the real victory of open source is that that everybody knows it and everybody uses it, whether it's an Android phone or Open Office or LibreOffice or one of any of its flavors. I talk to normal people. They know about it. They know it's an alternative to the paid Microsoft Office. Everybody knows Linux. I'm sitting in front of a Linux machine right now. So I think we can declare victory because we have the users. Of course, you guys are concerned about, contributors, and everybody who can should, but some of us don't have those skills, but we do use the thing. I was just looking back, and everybody can do this because all the episodes are on the website. If you go to twit.tv, and we have a shortcut that isn't widely known, but /FLOSS1, every episode, you can just increment that number. But if you go to FLOSS1 in the first episode, that's the one we did in April of 2017, 17 years ago. And then you can go through them. And in the first 20 shows, we interviewed everybody: Guido von Rossum, Rasmus Lerdorf, Miguel de Acaza, who at the time, I don't know if he'd even started. That was back when he was GNOME desktop guy and Simian. I guess the Mono project has started.
He and Nat Friedman. They were GNOME.
Larry Augustin, remember VA Software?
Oh yeah, very well.
Jimmy Wales, you ever hear of him? These are just these are the first 10 episodes I'm talking about. Of course, Chris and I introduced Randall Schwartz, the author of Learning Perl and Intermediate Perl, in episode 9, and of course Randall then took over the show and ran it for about 10 years until we replaced him with Doc. I think the victory of FLOSS Weekly is that we documented 17 years of open source. There's even Moglen talking about the brand new at the time GPL 3.0. Yeah. Jeremy Allison, who created Samba. This is a history, I think, Mad Dog, John Hall, of what happened.
Able to record. we had him on twice this.
Oh yeah, he's been on many times, but he should be. He's a great advocate for it. So Jay Shirley, who created Catalyst for Perl. We talked a lot about Squeak, Ruby on Rails, Smalltalk. Remember the Yahoo user interface library? Before there was React and Angular. And I could go on. I'm still in the first 30 episodes. We're still back at 2008. Here's Blender, the creators of Blender, Campbell Barton and Brecht van Lommel. So I think, and now these were the early days and it was audio only, but I think that we have, with your help, Doc, and Simon. Simon, you were on episode 39 back when you were still at Sun. Dan, Catherine, so many people, Jonathan, who's not here, have helped make this show a record, which was always the plan, the kind of the journal of record for the open source movement. Commander Taco, from Slashdot. It's been a great ride, and I guess I might as well, since I've already kind of broken the news, let people know that this is the last episode of FLOSS Weekly. That, as many know, we've been going through some financial hardship, as has the whole podcast industry. And we've been doing FLOSS Weekly all this time, for all 761 episodes as a pro bono gift. Yes, you had ads, but the ads never covered the costs. And unfortunately, we're not in a financial position to continue doing it pro bono. I know Jonathan is looking at ways of keeping the show going, so watch this space. Stay tuned. I would love to see it continue in some form or fashion. But it was our great privilege to, for 17 years, bring you the people who made open source happen and keep people up on open source. And it's sad that we have to end it. We're going to be canceling other shows as well. We last week laid off 3 of our most prized employees because I just can't make people work for free. I'd like to, but I can't. So, and we don't want to. I know that maybe we could do an open source podcast, but until then, we have to keep the lights on and keep the staff going. And so we're going to cut back in order to do that. And it grieves me because this is a show I thought was super important to our mission at TWiT of keeping people informed on technology and what was happening in technology, but more importantly, understanding it so that you could use it to your advantage. And that's exactly what open source is all about: is owning the technology, making it yours, and using it not for the benefit of some company, but because it serves you. So, Doc, I will. Yeah, we don't have to. Well, we don't have to belabor it, but I just wanted to let you know that this is the last episode. Yeah,
I don't want to belabor it either, but we really do appreciate your support and faith in open source and in the mission here, and I do think it bookends something. I think there's, it isn't just a gimmick that we're talking, a kind of a victory lap here. I do think there's a bookend of sorts. We went through it with Linux Journal. It was a similar thing. And, some of it has to do with just changes in the economics of things. It's got a text from Ant, who's one of us.
Love Ant, who produced the show for a long time.
Who produced the show and was a voice on the show from time to time. And he's moved on as well. And we love him, and we love, and we love Jammer B, who is behind the console today. Yeah. and you and Lisa, it's been nothing but appreciation and love through the whole thing.
Well, and in a way, what happened to Linux Journal is happening to podcasting. Paper magazines have disappeared. We talk about this. I'll give you a preview of our Christmas Eve episode. Doc's on it, of TWiT on Christmas Eve, and you talked about radio having 100 years. I think podcasting got about 20. Magazines might have gotten 80 or 90. But the cycle moves lots faster than it did, and now most of the advertising dollars are taken by YouTube and influencers, and that's where advertisers want to be.
Yeah, well, one of the stalwarts here at TWiT, Jeff Jarvis, just published a fabulous book. I'm about a third of the way through it, called The Gutenberg Parenthesis. And his case is that we're at the end of print. We're at the end of the print era. And Leo, you'll appreciate this or cringe at it, I'm not sure, but I heard a radio described as a really bad phone.
I'd say it's a really good phone.
A radio is really, it only does one thing,
way.
And it does it on a low frequencies that don't carry data very well. And you can use one in emergency, but otherwise it's useless.
Isn't that sad? Wow.
Isn't that sad?
Because you and I both
are old radio guys.
Yeah, we're old radio guys.
We come from there.
Yeah.
It's like,
well, we've seen it happen.
And we've seen it happen, and what we're really seeing is we're in the internet era now, and there's, I spent this last weekend. In fact, I just arrived here minutes before the show, after traveling 800 miles in 2 cars and 2 planes.
And you haven't slept all night, and I appreciate it, Doc. I really.
That's great. No problem. My extreme pleasure. But I was at my sister's house in North Carolina, going through old things, and one kind of thing was our mother, my sister and I, we were the two of us, so the 2 kids in the family, exchanged letters in the form of tapes, and those tapes still exist, and they're still in boxes. And we threw away all of the cassettes of music, because who wants those now? But we couldn't bear yet to part with our voices, our parent, or mostly our mother, because our father died in 1979. But these are, how we communicated, because phones were expensive. You were on long distance, you were paying for that. It was cheaper to buy a cassette, record it in the car, and send the cassette by surface mail, and it would get there, 4 or 5 days or a week later. that was, that gets me to something else that I think is important. And it's why it's incredibly important that you've saved all of these episodes going back to one. And that Linux Journal, the entirety of Linux Journal is still online. Thank you to the Slashdot people who actually own it now and are keeping the lights on. And we're working on this here in Bloomington, Indiana, which is history-based journalism and documenting things so that decision makers and journalists in the future can use it. The archival side of journalism is incredibly important, and so that's a big part of what my life is about at this point.
Yeah.
So,
and all 761 episodes are still available at twit.tv/floss. A lot of our shows are also on the Internet Archive. And I think that that's going to, in the long run, what a great project this has been for Brewster Kahle and company. And I think in the long run,
Bruce is a hero.
Yeah, he's a hero.
He's a real hero.
He's literally a hero. And in the long run, that's going to be very important because, I don't know how long our servers will stay up, but I have a pretty good feeling that the Internet Archive is going to be here to stay. So so this stuff does get preserved. These are I have friends. Okay, here we go. Old timering again, Doc. Sorry about this. Yeah,
that's good.
I have a friend, John Donaby, works in Toronto, very well-known radio personality, who has hundreds of reel-to-reel interviews of some of the greats in rock and roll, back to Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin. And I've been begging him for years to let me take those reels and digitize them. I don't know if they ever will, but I am very grateful that at least these shows will last. We should also mention Jonathan is going to continue doing the Untitled Linux show in the club, and I think that will continue to be our flagship Floss show. So that will go on because the club members support that. We don't need to sell advertising on that, and the club members pay for that. And I know Jonathan also has plans, or is trying to anyway, keep FLOSS Weekly alive in another form. So we'll still do that. Patrick Delahanty, you see
that? You saw that? Yeah. Read it off. It's really great.
So he's our engineer. He's the guy who keeps the roads must roll, keeps the bits flowing. He says Randall was on 484 episodes, Doc 179 episodes. Aaron Newcomb did 177 episodes. Jonathan Bennett 145. Dan Lynch 125. I was on 112. Simon Phipps 111, Sean on 37, Guillermo on 31, John O'Bacon, who did a lot of shows for us in the early days, 31. Catherine, you were on 29 shows. Gareth Greenaway was on 20. Chris DeBona bailed very early on. He was only on 18 shows, but he gets credit.
I didn't know Sean did more than Catherine. I would have thought it was the other way.
Interesting? Yeah. Thank you, Patrick. Yeah. We have the stats. If nothing else, we have the stats.
So we're down to I know Simon has to leave. Has a hard stop at the bottom of the hour. So let's do our plugs because we have them, and you don't have hair plugs, Simon, because you kept your hair. Damn it! But what do you have?
I'm going to encourage everyone to try and make it to FOSDEM this year. It's going to be huge. It's spread out over the preceding week as well. So I will be there from Monday to the following Monday. It is the weekend of February the 3rd and 4th in Brussels, in Belgium, in Brussels. It's free of charge. All you have to do is get there. And it is probably the world's biggest open source free software hackfest, with pretty much every community you can imagine represented. If you wanted to work out how to become a contributor, there is no better place you could go than Brussels in the 3rd and 4th of February. And if you're going, let me know, drop me a line. I'm easy to find. I'm Webmink in all the places that I could reserve that handle, and get in touch, and we can meet up and have a caffeinated beverage, probably not an alcoholic one, because I'm getting old now and I have to limit my alcohol.
Me too.
But thank you for, as they say, so long, and thanks for all the fish. Thank you for your hospitality in the studio, Leo, and also to John. And I'm going to check out now because I actually have a client meeting. I wasn't supposed to be on this week, and I have a meeting.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you.
Thanks for all you're great. And Dan, what do you got?
Well, I feel like I should kind of plug Simon's plug because that was really good.
Yeah, it was really good.
They should go to FOSDEM if you can. Yeah, definitely do that. What have I got to plug? So in terms of like free software, open source podcasting and so on, I'm going to be helping with the Free as in Freedom show, which Bradley Kuhn and Karen Sandler do from the Software Freedom Conservancy, if I can say it properly. Software Freedom Conservancy.
And Bradley was going to be our guest this week, by the way. So
he was.
You can pick it up.
Yeah, so we'll pick that up. But if you head to my website, danlynch.org, you can find all of that stuff on there. Other podcasts, music, my blog, which I will update, I'm sure, with a post about FLOSS Weekly. It's been great. I looked up and it's been 14 years I've been involved with FLOSS. Wow. So with the podcast, yeah. So it's been a long time. It's been a great ride and it's been a lot of fun. And a thank you to everyone who's been involved, especially behind the scenes. It's always great to see John, talk to John in the background there, Jammer B. He's been there from the early days. He helped me to learn how to host a few of these shows, which was a white knuckle ride, shall we say, for me anyway. It was a white knuckle ride. So thanks for everything.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you too. And so, Catherine, I know we have something to
we do.
You and I.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So Doc and I do another podcast because there are lots of podcasts, but we are again not advertiser supported and a labor of love. So we will continue. It is Reality 2.0. You can find that at reality2cast.com. We talk about a lot of things, but frequently open source software and tech policy and a lot of other things. But and you can also find me at Open at Intel, which is another podcast. And that is from our open source or open ecosystem group at Intel. I talk a lot. I mostly don't talk to Intel people. I talk to people all over the industry and some really interesting ones.
You're down to only 2 podcasts.
I know. It's very sad. I was kind of loving the overwhelming world of being involved in 3 different podcasts and trying to become more and more comfortable on a microphone, which is a whole other conversation.
But yeah, you do great.
Oh, thank you. So yeah, you can find me there and Doc there and elsewhere on the internet. And yeah,
I should point out too that Reality 2.0 is actually the rebranded Linux Journals podcast. It was a Linux Journals podcast before that.
And we kept it going.
It started as Linux Journals podcast. So when Linux Journal went away, or we went away from Linux Journal, we got a new title.
And I think that's pretty important to point out that podcasting isn't dead, obviously.
No.
They're more than ever. Yeah. It's a question of it being a viable financial entity, a business.
Yeah.
I mean, magazines aren't dead. The radio is far from dead. Blogging's not dead. These things continue on. And I think podcasting has a great future ahead of it, but it's just running it as a business, especially in the way, I take a lot of responsibility because I built this as an old media business, the kind of centralized, big studio, expensive equipment, video, a lot of things that you don't need to do. And really, if you guys, Catherine and Doc are a perfect example. You do it out of passion and love, and you could do it with virtually no cost. Those will continue forever, just as blogs will always be around.
Yeah,
there are probably more bloggers than ever.
Yeah, exactly.
There may be more magazines than ever that we don't see. They may not be on the newsstands, but they're online.
If you go to the Santa Rosa Barnes and Noble, they have literally like 6 stacks of magazines going. There's plenty of magazines. It's just the business has changed a lot. And I take full responsibility for building this. Doc, I built it like a radio station or a TV station.
I know. And when I go in there, it's like, hey, I know. and I make a practice of visiting old radio stations. I visited one in Burlington, North Carolina, this couple of days ago. The door's closed. There's nobody in there.
Yeah.
The tower's lit up. But another one was in Palm Springs, and it's on the air, but all the programming comes in from New Zealand.
Right.
and
that's a big
computer.
Problem. Wow. Yeah. And Doc, because you've been in our studio, I have a decommissioned AM transmitter that
I didn't know that.
Oh, next time you're in here, take a look. It was from Sioux City, Iowa. It was a little, I think, 1,000 watt daytimer in Sioux City. Yeah. But Mike Doro, the guy who makes those fabulous Doro meters, he also has a hobby of visiting old radio stations, and he actually takes their decommissioned transmitters off their hands and then reconditions them, just like a classic car guy would recondition a classic car, fixes everything up till it's pristine. And this beautiful transmitter, I don't know what I'm going to do with it when we close the studios. It weighs literally about 3,000 pounds. But
it has tubes in it.
It's tubes. Actually,
there you go. Mike, valves, as they say in the UK.
Valves. Mike Mike is a amateur radio hobbyist, a ham, and so he retuned it to the AM ham band. So you could actually use this as a ham radio. Maybe.
160 meters. You get around 160 meters on those things.
Yeah,
and 160 meter hams love it. I mean, there is a life for these things. It's time moves on.
Put it on a truck.
There it is.
Put it on a truck and go on.
There it is. Oh my gosh!
And remember, Doc,
in there somewhere.
You always you turn the plates on last, or is it first? I can never remember.
I think it's last.
I think it's last.
You turn the filament on first.
Filament on first, then the plates. You remember taking meter readings, Doc? That was part of the job.
I did. And at the station, I ran the transmitter weekends in North Carolina, and I ran a riding lawnmower out to the towers because there were ticks in the fields, and you would get covered with ticks. There were so many ticks, but you ran the lawnmower out there. You sort of mowed your way out to it.
Yeah.
And of course, the land under those towers is sold.
Yeah.
The station is almost gone. There it is.
You see, we opened the doors. You could see the dials. You could do your meter readings right now, Doc, and it's good you got your third class radio telephonic license from the Federal Communications Commission.
You get your third phone before you get your second and your first phone.
That's right.
I never got a first phone.
No, first tickets were for chief engineers. We lowly DJs just had to have third tickets.
I had to have you had to have a little framed thing. It was.
I still think
I probably have mine. Yeah, you're
again, next time you come to the studio, it's hanging in the hallway.
Yeah.
Because, I don't want the FCC to get us in trouble here. Everybody, correct me if I'm wrong, Doc, but it's my memory that every DJ I ever met, their lifelong dream was to own a radio station.
I know. It was, yeah. And some did.
Stupid
and lost
me.
their shirts on it.
Yes. Yeah. Dumb old me.
Cousin Brucey brought a station in New Jersey.
Exactly. I built one from scratch. Didn't have to get a FCC permit. I guess you do have my license. Look at that.
Well, that's mine.
Oh, that's yours, John? This is John's license. His third ticket.
Oh, wow.
So
his third ticket.
Jammer B. Actually, this is my ham. Oh, no. Yeah, this is my ham license, John. But that'll work, too.
Do you still have your ham license?
Of course. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I don't.
I have a general.
It was WV2VXH. I never got to be WA2VXH because I flunked the code test.
The advanced
twice.
Test. Yeah, you don't need it
by
anymore.
Missing a space. I know.
Had I had to pass the code test, I wouldn't have it. But I do.
Yeah.
W6TWT. It's a vanity license.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that.
Anyway, back to floss.
Yeah. Back to floss.
We have declared victory. The war is over. Open source has won. Everybody uses it. Almost everybody uses it every day. Whether you use an iPhone or an Android phone, you're using open source software, the heart of the beast. I think that's
when you're checking out on Amazon, you're using open source.
Absolutely.
Software.
Practically every website you're visiting. I mean, I don't know if in 2006 we would have anticipated a future like this. This show started before the iPhone. Before Android.
Yeah. That's 2006. I marked that as when I got my first fellowship at a university that wouldn't let me in. So
that's victory. That's another victory.
I've had 3 more since then.
See,
one now.
You should have let me in. Harvard didn't let me in either, so I'm jealous. That's nice. That's nice.
But we try, and I know I'm looking at the back channel here. Lisa's in there, and other folks from the show.
I never get a chance to do this. I want to give Lisa a little credit.
Oh, please do.
She's besides being my wife, before she was my wife, she came in as our CFO, became our CEO, and has been doing the job of about 8 people working her tail off for the last few years, ever since COVID, frankly, to keep this ship afloat. And she, more than anybody, it feels the losses that we've gone through.
Yeah, you can feel it.
Yeah, it just breaks her heart, and she's done, and because she feels like she's done everything she could, but it wasn't enough. So, but I don't blame. I don't think we can blame anybody for this. It's just the way the world works, and media moves on. And Leo was stupid to build a radio station.
Well, I'm thinking this is one of the best, if maudlin, Club Twit promos you can have.
Yeah. Well, yeah, Lisa's going to post in a couple of weeks our goals for 2024. She's very transparent, which I love, and is going to explain what our goals are in order to keep the company running, to keep doing shows. And it's sales goals, but it's most importantly for the people listening, it's the goals for Club Twit, our membership. It's just about 1% right now of our audience, a little bit above that. We really need to get that up in order to survive. So if you're not yet a member of Club Twit, it is, I think, a good deal, $7 a month. You get a lot of benefits, and it is vital to our continued success. So
it's like public broadcasting, but with ads.
It's the same.
That are actually called
It's the
ads.
same.
Yeah.
And eventually, public broadcasting has ads, right?
And they get 10%. So you give a goal of 10%.
Our goal, I tell you what, if we had 5%, we'd be able to continue this show and every other show. But right now we don't have that. So I can't ask you to work for free. As much as I'd like to. You and Catherine could do a show for free, but I can't ask you to work here for free.
Yeah. Well,
and don't forget to get on Club Twit to listen to the Untitled Linux show with Jonathan.
Yep.
Yes. And that's
a shame.
The reason that continues is because we don't have to sell ads for that. It's a club exclusive. The club members are paying for that. Twit.tv/Club Twit. If you're not a member, we would love it if you would join.
So this is where in radio they just bring up the music, and or maybe you'll do that.
Play you off the stage.
Yeah,
I really wish I had a violin now. I've only got a guitar.
You've got a guitar back there. We should have had
violin.
Do you have some blues? Get some blues going there, Dan. Come on.
Yeah, hang on.
Just a couple of bars of little 8-bar blues.
I was trying to find my harmonicas. I've got.
That'd be good.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
you could do that right on
a lonesome wail of a harmonica.
Yeah.
Here we go. I found them.
Okay, here we go.
The important question for any musician: what key are we in, guys?
I think a minor key. If I don't care which of the minor keys.
What is it? What do your big blues busters tend to go in?
A's quite a big one. E's quite a big one.
Yeah.
Let's give this one.
E's hard on the piano, but it's easier on a harp. Here we go.
Oh, you know what's happening? It's too loud and
it's clipping
it.
Zoom is turning it off.
Wow.
Oh, it's too loud. Oh well. Zoom, I tried to back away.
No, but just back up a bit.
Turn off the anti-harmonica button. I think that's.
It's because Zoom doesn't like the blues, I think.
Yeah, you got to back up.
Nothing.
It's just not working.
Wow, that's so weird.
That's disappointing.
That's so weird.
It looked good for people on the video. It looked like I was doing something.
That's not a bug. That's a feature.
You could do,
it's got a blues filter.
Woke up this morning and my show was gone.
Oh, don't be sad. Oh,
that's all right. I didn't mean it to be sad. Actually, that was funny.
We love you guys. Thank you so much for your service to open source and to Twit. We really appreciate what you've done. All the hosts over the years. I love Floss Weekly. It breaks my heart that we can't keep doing it.
And we love you, Leo, and Lisa, and everybody else in the.
Thank you.
In the compound there. Do incredible work, and it's holy work. We really appreciate it.
Jonathan Bennett will continue with the Untitled Linux show in the club. And I know Jonathan was hoping to have an announcement about Floss today. He wasn't able to get that together, but there is, I think, at least some hope that another organization is going to pick up Floss Weekly and continue it. But we will let you know, of course. In fact, if you're subscribed to the feed, we'll give you the details on the feed if we find out something.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you all.
Thank you guys
great.
too.
Imagine, if you will, some sad blues in A minor.
From Dan Lynch himself. So no, wait, here's the guitar. So here we go. Is the guitar doing
it? Is that coming through? Is it filtered as well?
Let's see.
Yeah,
bits of it.
Music gets cut off. You know, way back when Jeff Robbins.
There's an algorithm here. Damn it.
Way back when Jeff Robbins created the FLOSS Weekly theme.
Oh yeah,
of course,
Jeff Robbins.
Yeah, he's at Lullabot, and he had a very mediocre musical career before that. No, I shouldn't say that.
He was a rock star.
He was a rock star. He's an American musician, and he did a wonderful job. He was in a band called, as we'll all remember, a Boston-based power trio called Orbit. And in fact, Orbit appeared on the Lollapalooza tour in '97. In any event,
I remember Orbit.
That wonderful FLOSS Weekly theme that you hear from time to time was composed and performed by Jeff Robbins. And if we can find it, John, let's find the one with lyrics.
Oh wow!
Because Evan Prodromo, who was one of the creators of Laconica, and we had on in the first 10 episodes back in 2006,
and we had on a couple of weeks ago,
and you had on it recently, says, what happened to the one with lyrics? You'll see what happened to it. We'll play it as we say good night and God bless. And as Simon said quite aptly, thanks for all the fish. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.